at one moment you were working for Yahoo and you had what you would have thought would have been your dream job, you weren't actually enjoying it. If you wanted to have a cocktail beforehand, that's totally fine. This is the choose your own adventure kind of podcast.
Yeah, all right, okay.
Anyway, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, great to be here.
So I kind of want to start at the beginning. I know that you worked for a company called broadcast.com, and I kind of want to start there.
Ago, yes.
Just a few years ago, and then work our way back to how you got into Silicon Valley.
Oh, okay. So some of your listeners are not going to have any idea what I'm talking about, but there was a time, a long time ago, when computers did not have sound cards and speakers. And I was in Dallas, Texas, and I walked into a little loft in a section called Deep Ellum, and these two guys had a 10,000 stream reel audio license, and they were broadcasting some radio stations and CDs and a few other things over the internet. And they had this crazy idea that they could use the extra capacity on this so-called network to stream corporate events over the internet. And a rational person would have said, "But hey, man, like, can people really receive this? Does this work? I mean, how big is the audience?" I skipped all those intelligent questions and jumped right into to selling webcasting. And
I actually, when you said that, I also jumped straight to the. That sounds awesome. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
no rational questions were asked by me either.
Yeah. Well, you didn't grow up with computers that had that were not connected to the internet, but. And I was 5, just so everybody who is not watching this and listening to this, I'm much younger. So like at the beginning, it was horrible. All my friends were going off to like get their MBAs and law degrees, and I was literally sitting on a folding table next to a bathroom in a loft that did not have a ceiling on it. Use your imagination.
Oh my God.
Making cold calls all day long. And people were, literally, it was just like, I was just like saying like, "Hey, do you want to time travel?" I mean, people were not, this is not a thing. Clearly, after a while.
Work? When you asked them if they wanted to time travel?
No, I never did. But it was like asking people, it'd be like asking someone today if you wanted to time travel. It was just saying to someone, "Hey, this thing, the internet that you may or may not have access to at your company, do you want to then broadcast like a corporate event?" And so it was just, none of it made sense. It's not like people were like, "Oh yeah, we should consider doing that." A combination of technology and time and everything else caught up. So it turned out okay. Yahoo bought the company, and my family and I moved to London to work for Yahoo in Europe. Spent a few years there, and then ended up in Silicon Valley. And I was with Yahoo. I went from being a sales guy at broadcast.com to being a business development executive, all on the job training, curiosity, and then, worked my way into different operating roles and did a couple terms as a CEO and COO. So all were excellent uses of my journalism degree from Southern Methodist University.
My parents would say the same thing about my art history degree.
Yeah, why not? Right? Yeah.
So when you were, I imagine that you being able to move through different business units into different positions was as a result of your inclination to do more than you were asked to do in your roles. Was it just you being like, "Hey, I want to learn more about this. Like, can I get involved in this?" Or do you think like people saw your drive and they were like just giving you more projects?
I later someone described it to me, and I don't think that they or I were the ones to come up with this, but when it comes to advancing ahead, I mean, I think a big part of it, quite frankly, is do the job that you want to have. So if your job doesn't have these responsibilities, go ahead and take some of them on. And I get the whole counter of like, well, I'm not being paid for all these things. And look, let's just live in the world of being somewhat sensible and rational, and that not everybody out there is a taker and mean, and those people exist. I totally get it. But, these were the, glory days of Yahoo. There were a lot of smart, ambitious people who were actually, were superhuman beings, and some of
Yeah.
them, 20 some odd years later, which totally sucks to say that, um, I'm friends with today and have all the respect for. So it was, sometimes doing it, and sometimes it was volunteering myself, and other times it was, kind of taking the extra time to learn something and showing up and being able to contribute, maybe just to a conversation. So it was a lot of things, but it was about being proactive.
Yeah. And I also think, like, I'm sure people will get mad at me for saying this, but if you want to get promoted, for example, you
Mm-hmm.
have to do the job that you want to be promoted to
Yes,
before
absolutely.
you get paid for it. Because I
Yeah.
think, like, that when people say, well, oh, I'm not going to do the job if I'm not getting paid for it, like, to me, you probably don't embody the entrepreneurial spirit, because I think a lot of that is
Yeah.
you work hard first and then you get the reward later. And I think a lot of companies obviously expect to see that you're able to do the job before you get paid to do the job. It's why we have job interviews. It's why,
Yeah.
like, most of the time you get hired based on your previous experience, because they want some sort of
Mm-hmm.
insurance that you're going to be able to do the job. And, like, anybody who's saying that they want to be paid for the job, that they're doing, like, I can see in certain scenarios, but also, like, we're not talking about a situation where your boss is telling you to do more than you're technically supposed to do, especially if you already have a full plate. This is more of a situation where you're like, I know what I'm capable of. I know I'm capable of more than what I'm currently doing.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, therefore I'm going to go out and I'm going to ask questions. I'm going to,
Yes.
try to be more of a, like, get involved in other areas of the business that I'm personally interested or know that I could be good at.
Yeah, and I think you're 100% right. And the thing to keep in mind is to look outside of yourself. Uh,
Mm,
Part of that reality is you may say, I'm not willing to do that because I'm not being paid for it. Chances are there's two or three or more people in that organization who are. So
yeah.
you're not only not giving yourself the opportunity, but you're going to wake up and you're going to find that the people who did take those risks probably are going to be your boss at some point. And
Yeah.
so, when someone says, well, I shouldn't do this and that, I'm like, you're looking at the world through your own individualistic lens. And I'm not trying to be critical of that, but the reality is it may be that the person to your left and to your right are, maybe going to take that chance and do that extra work or take that extra course online. Um,
Totally.
and, what are you going to have to show for it other than maybe a little bit of regret?
Yeah, and I think it also lends itself to the way that our world is right now. I think instant gratification is such a problem. It's like it creates so many issues with our daily lives and our
Very true.
personalities.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the whole I don't want to do the job that I'm not being paid for right now, to me, is like you're choosing the easy path. You're taking that, like, instant gratification of just, like, you're showing up, you're doing the prescribed job that you're getting paid to do, and then you go home. Whereas the other people who might be more inclined to step outside of their role because they know either, like, they're capable of more or they have bigger dreams, like, they're the ones who are going to be like, it's okay if I'm doing more
Sure.
and working harder a little bit right now, because, like, I know it's going to pay off later.
I so agree with that. And the thing that I look for when hiring, and I've said this for a number of years, you can teach somebody how to use a certain marketing platform or how to sell something or even how to like what is really hard to teach is curiosity.
Mm,
And it's the thing that I look for because curious people will go find the solution. And
totally.
I'm not advocating working 16 hours a day and not having work life
Yeah.
balance, but there are periods where you will have to not have work life balance. That's just life as it is. But I always look for somebody who's just has an insatiable curiosity where they want to know what their coworkers are doing. Sure, maybe to make a greater contribution or be more of a team player, but also just to know. Like,
Yeah.
I tell people, like, if you're working in a big company, and you go out to lunch in the cafeteria or whatever it may be, it seems a little awkward until you've done it a couple of times. Go find somebody over in a different department and just say, can we just have coffee? Can we just have lunch? Don't tell me you're too busy. You are so doing yourself such a disservice by not tapping into this reservoir of knowledge of, like, what do you do? What's your background? How did you get into this? Tell me what your day is like. What are the challenges
Yeah.
that you face? What are the things you love about your job? Be curious about it, and you'll be, so surprised at that as months, quarters, and years go by, you're like a much more rounded person and much more valuable.
Yeah.
And that should be really rewarding.
I think you also, at that point, know so much more about the business that you, like you said, you become so much more of a valuable asset because you're like, oh, I understand what's going on. And then on top of that, you're like, well, I made friends with Nancy in finance and her issues are X, Y, and Z. And I talked to Greg in engineering and like his problems are X, Y, and Z. And like, I think I have a solution to that of how we can like collaborate and make the teams stronger and work more well-rounded together. But like, nobody would have figured that out unless you talk to both people.
And that's just a leadership trait. I mean, like, as you grow in your responsibility, and the more people you manage, the more you're dealing with other people's problems, and it's just
That's so
part of it.
interesting.
And
Yeah, I never thought about it like that. And in that, like, as a leader, I guess it is that way because your role is to be the intersection between different cross-functional roles. Like you're the point at the hub and spoke in the very center, and you're responsible for ensuring that everything works well together. And I don't know why, I just always thought, I guess like curiosity and leadership really go together.
Absolutely.
In that way, and I'd never really seen it that way before.
Well, look, if someone showed up, on a Monday morning and walked into the VP's office and say, hey, guess what? Maddie and I had this insanely productive conversation on Friday. We got together on Saturday for 2 hours and we did this thing. We've already implemented it. And it's like this thing, like your boss would like almost have a heart attack and fall over. She'd be like, what? Like, are you kidding me? It's Monday morning. And like, you didn't come in and be like, well, the servers are down and like customers mad and like, this web page is terrible.
Like, had a great weekend. How about you?
Yeah. I mean, it's just a, when someone comes to you with a solution, what I tell people is like, if you're relying on me to have all the answers, we're hosed. Like we just are. But when you come to me with a problem, give me choices, because my job is to have a broad view of an organization. And if you say, here's the problem, your options are A and B or A, B, and C, and I recommend B and here's why, that is magic. That is 80, curiosity and your ability to do that will carry you so far in your career, because what you're learning to do is not just present, be like, oh, we had a terrible click-through rate in that campaign. Oh, well. And it's like, well, shit, like, then what are you doing here other than sucking up oxygen? If you don't have like some kind of suggestion for me, then I need somebody who's going to come in and be like, boy, that one just kind of went in the toilet. I think it's because of this call to action, and I suggest we A/B test these things, and here's what I think we should do. Even if it's a bad suggestion, at least it's something to rule out and be like, no, that's terrible. I know because of experience that you don't have, or it's, okay. I don't have to spend time thinking about this. You've got a game plan. It sounds reasonable. Go for it.
Totally. It's wild to me when you, like, I can't even be friends with problem people. I call them like, you're either a problem person or you're a solution person.
Yep.
And I physically can't even be around problem people because it's such a negative vibe. And it's always just like, I think a victim mentality, or
I know what you mean.
Some form of like, it's just, I don't want that around me. Like, I need somebody who's thinking, who wants to make like positive changes, because then you're like flowing. If you're just a problem person, like it's just stagnant and it's stopped.
It's a drag, man.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I feel like you would know this better than anybody. I think often in the world of social media, you see so many people who like overnight are suddenly running a business or like have millions of followers and suddenly are being confronted by opportunities to commoditize their platforms. And the more that I do the podcast, the more that I talk to entrepreneurs, the more that I do not ever want that to happen to me. I do not want to become like an overnight success. I would have no idea what I'm doing. I don't have any experience running a business or starting a business. And like, it's getting me thinking about kids who are just graduating from college, who are doing a startup, and they're having to teach themselves so much. And for you, like starting out where you started out and then now having your own company and having all that experience and learning so much through it, like how do you help, or what would you say, I guess, to new entrepreneurs to help them gain that or like, do you have any recommendations for them to gain some sort of experience, I guess, in a shorter time frame?
I do. Look, I don't knock working at a big company, but regardless of the size, forget that what the company, I mean, within reason, right? I mean, don't go work in something that's not aligned with your values, but don't worry as much about what the company does or the brand or how it's going to look on your resume. For your first 3 to 5 years, look at who's the manager that you're going to be working for. Please, please, please develop a craft. Don't tell me that you're 24 years old and you want to be a CEO. I mean, if you're successful, you're probably lucky. Like you bought the ticket and you scratched it off and it's like $1 million. I'm a genius. Maybe. But if you learn a craft, I learned the craft of selling at broadcast.com. I learned the craft of very strategic, complex deal making at Yahoo. And it was a combination of trial and error and some extraordinarily smart people who were infinitely patient that allowed me to ask a lot of questions. I'm sure most of them dumb. And I now, at this stage of my career, whether it's doing a podcast, whether it's being on a panel, or whether it's taking a phone call, people say, like, why do you do it? I'm like, look, I did not get here on my own accord. It was a lot of people helping me along the way. And it's my joy and my responsibility to give back. And so if you want to save yourself a lot of headache, totally cool to go work at big ass company. Because if you're working for Lisa or for Kevin and they're like a really good product manager or finance person or marketer or salesperson, whatever it may be, you're going to learn a craft and you're going to learn how to do a job. And those are good habits. And, you know, if you think I'm crazy, think about every athlete that goes and gets drafted into professional sports. And what they will tell you oftentimes is what they learn in the first 1 or 2 years is, I learned how to become a professional. I learned how to study film. I learned how to practice. I learned how to study. I learned these things when I thought I knew this stuff when I was a D1 college athlete. But once I got into that locker room and I saw somebody who's been doing this for 5-10 years and the commitment that they make to break things down and do the extra stuff that's not just relying on their God-given talent, they're like, then I became a professional. And so learn how to be a professional before you try to become a founder.
Yeah, that's truly like fascinating information. And it was actually something that I was thinking about just the other day. I work in tech and I'm an office manager, which has been a very interesting experience because it's the first time I've ever worked like in the business, but not on the business.
Okay.
And one of the things I'm really enjoying about it is that I really get to sit back and just listen to all the different areas of the business and almost like study our CEO sometimes. We had this big meeting last month. We have one every month. And we were talking about the last board meeting that we have. And listening to him talk as a CEO, I'm like, oh, the way that you're explaining our numbers is so fascinating to me because your ability to hold on to the narrative and use the data to continue to, like, I'm not saying that he's like spinning a story, but I mean, he kind of is, right? Like he's telling the board what our current numbers look like and why we're investable and why we're somebody that you want to stick around and hang out with for the story of what our company does and what we are. And I was like, that is so smart. Like this man is so intelligent and I'm filing this information away for myself later. And like, I think about it all the time. I'm like, if I was just alone at 28 trying to like start a business, I wouldn't know what to do. I would have to rely on either the successful people in my life or like go out and make friends or something. Because if I didn't have the experience of being able to watch and learn and participate, like I truly don't understand how other startup founders do it.
Well, you'd be fine, and let me tell you why. Because if you combine curiosity with tenacity with a level of humility, then you're in pretty good shape. So you would try a bunch of things, and like the thing that like one of my special powers is I have no issue looking like an idiot.
Yeah.
Like I'm not going to walk into a meeting with my pants off or something, but like, you know,
that'd just be rude.
Yeah, and very uncomfortable. And I wouldn't not to be when that would not want that to be my moniker.
Yeah.
But like, if you do something, and it fails, you're like, all right, well, I mean, I tried it and I had logic behind it. So don't worry about the failure. Don't worry about the messes that it makes. I mean, like within reason, of course, right? Back to that. But it's your ability to kind of take away from those experiences. But to your point, when you observe someone else, I don't know your company. I don't know your CEO, but I would bet a hefty sum of cash that a lot of that experience in getting to that point with that ability to deliver that kind of message also comes with a lot of cuts, scrapes, and bruises. And so when I've done coaching with startups, I'm like, look, if you think you've made a mistake and you're really beating yourself up over it, what I can tell you is hold my beer. I've made a bigger one, a dumber one, or I've helped clean up a bigger and dumber one. You will get through this, and you're either going to take this as, a really, devastating blow to your ego, or you're going to pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and say, what did I learn from that? And to this day, I mean, even though I've been through dozens of venture-backed startups and been a CEO, I have sent out, marketing email campaigns that I have created and written with like a complete and total flub typo in the subject line. Yeah. Like, and I see it and I schedule for the next morning. I wake up and I'm like, damn it. Like, my name's at the bottom with my little picture on it, right? Too. Like, Eric Grafstrom, CEO. I'm like, trust this guy. So you just have to kind of move on.
Yeah, I think the more I realize that like entrepreneurs is just really like a personality type. It is, like you said, I think a mix of curiosity and tenacity. And then I think the best ones are always humble. I think the worst ones sometimes have like too much ego about them. And either like when they fail, they can't handle it and they freak out and they like, stop, or their ego gets the better of them and then they can't make good decisions later on.
Or they take credit for stuff, right?
Yeah.
And as they say in the NFL, the quarterback's job is when you win, give credit to everybody else, and when you lose, take sole responsibility for the loss. And that's a leadership trait, which is, I share all the glory and I carry all the blame. And again, don't take it too far, but you got to be able to look at it. And like, if you think you can do this all on your own, I mean, it's laughable. Go ahead. Just go for it. Like, I don't have a whole lot of additional advice for you. Like, rock on. Let me know how it works out. Eric@exitguide.com. Like, if you want to send me an email in 3 years, that's fine. But none of us do. None of us do.
Yeah. And so I guess I'm also curious, at what point did you decide to make the transition to CEO entrepreneur life?
There wasn't like a burning bush moment where I'm like, I'm doing this. It was kind of a series of events. I've been very, very fortunate in, so I think I chose to jump into something that was not created when I started at AudioNet, that, broadcast.com. And I could have stayed at Yahoo. And I remember pulling into the garage in Sunnyvale, California one day. And I pulled in the parking garage, and I had the job that, one, I probably would have never thought I could have. I was director of business development for a $600 million business unit. And if you'd asked my, 10-year prior version of myself, I would have been like, that's so impressive and cool. And I hated it. I just remember parking. I think it was on the second floor. Like, I could almost go back and find the exact parking spot. And I wasn't happy. And it wasn't because, look, the company was doing well. I had a cool job. I was being paid well. I was working in Silicon Valley, wearing slacks. I don't know why. And it was just, I couldn't figure it out. I wasn't far enough along in my own personal development and professional development to realize how to diagnose it. And I was scared. I was scared as to kind of not having that identity and being important, and kind of really had to go through a very difficult period to get back on the saddle and take risks again and put myself out there. And then after you do it a couple of times, I think it was just the fact of things don't work out and you land on your feet is this liberating thing that's part of the entrepreneurial journey. It's like, it's not like, I mean, I didn't lose a leg or like no one shot me. Like there's people in this world who have real challenges in front of them. Like, okay, I learned a ton from a bunch of smart people and lived to tell about it. And I can go do this again. And it's worked out.
Yeah. I mean, failure is like really never the worst case scenario. In fact, it's always really almost invaluable because you're learning so much from that experience.
Yes.
And I'm so curious to know, because it kind of sounds like you had like a whole identity shift where at one moment you were working for Yahoo and you had what you would have thought would have been your dream job and your dream life, and you weren't actually enjoying it. Do you think it was just because like you wanted to do something different and like that chapter in your life was just coming to a close? Or was there something specific about your life at that time that you just weren't vibing with?
That's a profound question, at least for me. And not to take this in a direction that the podcast isn't about. I'm a person of faith, so I'm a Christian, and there was a point where I remember we had just moved to California. We went to this church that was down the street and turned out to be where we went to 17 years and before we moved to Austin. And there was something there where I was really struggling with the career stuff, and something hit me that just said, I didn't bring you here for the job. And I walked outside. I remember I was crying. My wife's like, is everything okay? And I'm like, I don't know what's happened, but I'm not here for, which if you've just moved your wife and two very young children to like the most expensive place in the United States, like that's not like what you want to roll out and be like,
totally.
We're not here for the job. Like,
you're like, okay.
I'm become a professional motocross guy. I don't have a motorcycle, but we're going to get one. So I think there's something that for me, gave me confidence that to kind of get out there and worry less about my identity and how I look with other people. And I truly believe that I've done my best to listen to what God has put in front of me to be who he created me to be and accept that. And at times I get it wrong, and at times it's a little bit messy, and at times it drives me crazy that I can't seem to just go take a nice paying job at a nice company and do that. But then I'm like, well, and I have all these kind of funny, clever ways of stating it. But if someone were to say that to me, my response to them and to myself is, well, you got to take that up with the manufacturer.
Yeah.
And for me, I'm like, look, I'm comfortable with that's who I am. And whether I turn out to make $100 million and be on television, or whether I just plug away and do stuff, that's all cool. That's out of my control.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually really relate to that because for so long, I think probably if I really go back to it, is really ever since I went to college. Like everyone was always asking me to fit in this box where it was like, you go to college, you pick your major, and then you get out of college and you go and work in that job that you majored in because that's what we paid for your college to do. And then you stay and you like maybe change companies and like, especially for me, my parents, especially my mom, because my mom was an entrepreneur and I think it was really hard for her and she had a rough childhood. And I think she wanted me to have something more stable and like, it was something that was obviously like not what she had. She wanted better for me. And so she was always encouraging me to stay at a company, work my way up. And even when I got my tech job, she was like, this is great. Office manager is just your entry in. And then like, once they see what you're capable of, you'll be promoted in no time. And I've always been telling her like, Mom, that's not who I am. And I have never felt comfortable in working underneath other people. I think like I've always been meant to be an entrepreneur in some way, shape, or form. And I felt that I think it really hit me when I was like, all I'm doing is executing somebody else's vision. And that works for me right now because I need financial stability. I don't have my idea off the ground. Like there are a lot of other factors contributing to the fact that like, that's where I need to be right now. But when I thought about it, it's true. Like at my core, I would not be comfortable staying in a situation like this where it was like, I go get up every day, I go to work at this company for somebody else, I go home, and like then I die. Like that's just that's not it for me. There's something else.
Sounds terrible. Okay.
Right? It's like my worst nightmare.
Yeah. Yeah. Depressing scenarios with Maddie. That's a new podcast that you can start. Be great.
Yeah, this is a really inspiring
episode. Sponsored by Zoloft. Yeah. All right.
So how did you make, I guess, like, I really love the idea of your company because I think it touches on really important people that are not always represented in, you know, in exit strategies. You think exit strategy, you think of big Silicon Valley VC-backed firms, and you don't always think of like Joe's Plumbing Service. And
that's right.
I think you're bringing important information to people who previously either like didn't consider themselves to have access to. And how did 100%. You get there? Like, do you think it's because you were working for Yahoo and you were like, these people have this?
Well, so I went from Yahoo and when we moved to California, I lasted like 2-3 years at Yahoo after landing in California. So the next 15 was back in the venture-backed startups. And in the last couple of years that I was there, you know, I mean, it sounded cool. I got to be a CEO and a COO and bang, bang, living in Menlo Park and Sand Hill Road and blah, blah. For whatever reason, I was getting brought into, I don't have an MBA, but I believe the technical term would be dumpster fire. So like these, you know, companies that investors were either concerned or like really frustrated. And so they needed to figure out, you know, something. And so companies that had raised maybe as little as $5 million to as much as $70 to $100 million, that something was a mess. And I ended up helping a number of companies, you know, I ended up helping a number of investors. I don't know if I helped the companies. I helped a number of investors go in and analyze what was going on, come up with a recommended plan of action, which could be this thing can be turned around. We'll put in a new team. This thing is probably not going to, you know, get fixed to where you're going to get a big return out of this, but we can sell the assets and get out of it, or it's such a mess we need to shut it down.
Right.
And so you do that. And I learned a whole bunch of mechanics around different aspects of M&A in exits. So, you know, we all like to think that exiting a business is this, like, there's balloons and streamers and confetti and, you know, you get a big novelty check and, you know, hands are, you shake hands. But, you know, sometimes, you know, exits are asset purchase agreements and other things. So I did it for a while. A couple of things. One, I kind of realized it at more of a soul level. I was effectively fixing problems for millionaires.
Yeah.
I mean, it was basically the job. And so people was like, isn't it cool when you're working for these firms and these companies? I'm like, not really, because my job oftentimes was laying off 30 to 70% of the workforce, restructuring some things, making some hard decisions. I wasn't cut out for it. And there's a phrase I heard somewhere, which is, be careful about being good at a job you don't want. And that resonated with me wherever I heard that. And I was in the car one day, you know, a story comes on the radio about small businesses owned by baby boomers, and they were struggling as to how to exit their business. And for whatever reason, it spoke to me. I was working at a couple, you know, clients, not all of them dumpster fires, but I was doing a lot of fractional COO, CEO type work. And when I looked at it, I was like, I don't think the problem is people can't find a buyer for their business. I think the problem is way earlier in that 85% of small businesses in the U.S. are owned by baby boomers and Gen X. It's like the youngest, like 44. Most of them are over 60. And these are Main Street businesses. This is, you know, the plumber. It's the HVAC business. It's the shipping business. It's local retail. This is 40% of our GDP. This is not startups. This is when you get in the car and you go run your errands on a Saturday. It's the places you drive by in that strip mall. It's the person who comes to your house to fix something. It's all those things that you interact with. That is huge, huge portion of our economy. But when you look at these, about 90% of them are like really small. They're worth $250,000 to maybe $3 million. So over the next 15 years is those of us in Gen X, I'm not a boomer, Gen Xer, is we age out of these things, which is going to happen. Like, what I tell people is like, what's your market? I'm like, well, 100% of people who own businesses. Cause like, they're going to want to do something else. They're going to get an offer. They're going to die. They're going to get sick, whatever. But like, you got to do this. This isn't Coca-Cola where it's like, well, we've got 27 kick-ass, super world-class, smart people that want to be CEO of Coca-Cola. It's like, you got to figure something out. And so what we aim to do is combine, kind of the online tools to help people go through a process and then supplement it with on-demand experts. So what we want to do is, the guy who's never able to afford an expensive lawyer or an M&A advisor and has a really small business, but he's like, I want to sell this in my community, or I want to sell it to my employee. How do we get them from, I have no idea what I'm doing and I'm very fearful of getting taken advantage of, to saying, look, what I'm trying to do is sell this to my employee for a reasonable price. And I now understand the steps in the process. And I know that when I need some help, I can get it. And I can do this for, several $1,000s at the most. And that I can do this at a pace that I'm comfortable, but it does require that I do some of the work, like uploading financials and describing your business and other things. But we try to make that very approachable and easy for them.
So how did you get from 0 to 1 then? If like,
it's horrible.
Did you start like building the platform, or was it going out and like talking to your potential clients?
Yeah, so I didn't build it. I have no like real marketable skills when it comes down to it. So no, I can't code. I can't build anything. I can hand wave and talk to people, which is a skill. Yeah. And so, there was method to it. The method was, I think, the problem is that people don't know what to do. I don't think the problem is they can't find a buyer. I think the problem is they're just frozen with they don't know what to do.
Yeah. They're looking at this insurmountable task and they're like, I literally don't even know where to start.
So, and then 2 was like, I'd been in enough businesses as an operator in Silicon Valley to know that, but if it's going to cost me more than say $40 or $50 just to acquire a qualified lead, I'm not going to be able to build a product that has a high enough ROI to make it a business. And so what I mean by that is if I have to pay too much to acquire leads and only X%, even at a reasonable rate, convert them to paying customers, either I have to have a pretty low cost to acquire those users, or I have to have like this really high. Now, if I were selling, if I were an intellectual property attorney and my average engagement was $40,000, I can pay a lot for acquiring a lead because I got this thing where I'm charging $40,000.
Right.
But small businesses aren't going to drop 30 or 40K, on this process. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to acquire people cost effectively, talk to as many of them as I can, and really tease out the thesis that what they were looking for is help, even to see if they could exit their business and wanted help with moving through that process. And so we didn't, like, I spent money getting help building landing pages and a form, and then a kind of a quasi product on the back end. But what I wanted to validate was whether this was something worth building and whether there was actually a business there. And so, one thing I tell a lot of early entrepreneurs, I'm like, look, you get, especially nowadays, you get no credit for building something, even if it's cool and complicated, because no one cares. But if you build something that people need and are willing to pay for, it can have a bad UI and, like a 1998, like little JPEG logo up at the top of your page, and people can make fun of it all day long. But like, if you're printing money, like, Craig Newmark is laughing all the way to the bank. I mean, Craigslist is still, hands down one of the clumsiest, silliest looking websites on the internet. But website. Like, I was listening to NPR today and someone's like, we're interviewing so-and-so and she's the director of something at the Craig Newmark School of Business or whatever it was. I'm like, good for you, dude. Like he just found a problem. The guy's made $1 kajillion and he's turned around to do a lot of great things with his money. But the point being is it was just a pain point that we're trying to solve, which is how do we get people through this process so that they're not intimidated by it. They understand what's going on, and they're doing it, cost effectively.
Yeah, and there's a lot of time later to fix all of those smaller things, right? Like at the beginning, you're just trying to get your idea validated
Yes.
by spending as little money as possible so you can just even understand if this is something to invest in personally before you pursue anything like, physical. So it's like, yeah, okay, sure, and I mean, if I wanted to put this in context for people who, were just building like a regular company, or if they wanted to be a creator, it's like your first, video on social media, for example, doesn't have to be nice or aesthetic or perfect. Just like put it out there and see if it works, and you'll figure it out later. And then there's time to refine from there. Like you can make your website prettier, you can hire a designer later, but you just have to make sure that your idea actually functions.
It is, look, perfection is the enemy of progress, not mine. Came from somewhere. And it is a continual learning cycle of what works and what doesn't work. And to your point, I don't mean this as a jab, but I've said this on more than one interview and podcast in the past, so it's probably out there. I would probably never hire someone at a startup from Google or Facebook, or people are like, why? And I'm like, because like I don't know what I'm getting when it comes to this stage of were they just part of one of the boats and the rising tide lifted all of it? And when somebody can come in and say, look, I had my own startup and it didn't work out, and a year later, here's why it didn't work. Here's the mistakes we made. Here's what I would do differently. Here's the things we did do right. And had I done X, Y, and Z, maybe it would have had a different outcome. So, it is this, back to my statement earlier, which is if you're not, one of my superpowers, I'm not afraid to look like an idiot, because I feel like I'm just trying and I'm learning. And sometimes what I have reminded teams of, including my own, I'm like, look, we're just trying to get data to inform the next decision. We may not convert it all, but if at least we talk to 20 more business owners or get something out of it, it will at least allow us to make a better decision in a week, a month, or in a quarter. And that sometimes is that type of success you're looking for, versus I think the challenge of coming from a big company into a small company is you're like, well, we just need to do X, Y, and Z. And it's like, well, you've had product market fit for 35 years at this company. Like, you don't have to worry about those types of issues. You have to kind of refine, something that exists to keep market share or increase market share or improve other metrics. But you're not saying like, do people even want to pay for this thing that I've got?
Yeah.
It's a whole different set of issues.
Yeah. And honestly, I think it's also like in order to get that data, you have to take that step. And I think there's a lot of fear around that. And I think fear sometimes manifests itself as perfectionism.
Yep.
And you're like, oh, well, it's not good enough, and so therefore I can't start it. But really, you have to sort of, if you bring it back, right, it's just, the root of that is just fear of failure. And failing is great, especially as an entrepreneur, because then, like, also, even if you have investors, for example, and you make a mistake and you can go back to them and you can at least say like, okay, yeah, so this quarter's numbers like aren't great because we tried something and it didn't work out, but it's like, now we know. And similar to, I mean, you could even apply this as like a life metaphor, right? Where you're like, okay, well, I went to college and I thought I wanted to be a doctor, but I took, intro to biochemistry and I failed and I really wasn't good at it. And not only did I fail at it, I like really hated it. Yeah. And you're like, okay, great. Now we know that we don't want to be a doctor. Like, awesome. Yeah. Now we can take that data and like try something else and figure it out until you find what works. And like business is just that, but on a smaller scale, honestly.
Look, life is an adventure. If you're so fortunate as to have the ability to take those risks, my kids are now young adults, and they don't live with us. They're reasonably far away. One's in the UK and one's in Denver, and they grew up in California. We're here in Texas, and it's just mishmash of travel at the holidays. But I've always said, like, the world is a big and interesting place. Get out there and explore it. And your story about doctor is funny. This is an anecdote. It's not even totally related, but I remember I was working at this pretty successful startup. I was the chief operating officer, and we had this guy who was a very quiet engineer, but he was really good. He's really smart. And I asked him something like how he got into this. He said, well, my whole family is doctors. I said, well, what happened? He said he got through, I don't know, whatever, part of pre-med, and then he got into some lab, and he fainted at the sight of blood. And he kept telling his parents, he's like, I don't want to be a doctor. I don't want to be a doctor. I don't want to be a doctor. And then, like, he literally conked out and hit his head. And, like, the school called him, like, he can't. Like,
this is not going to work out.
Yeah, like, he can handle the course load. It's just the human body part that, like, is not going to work.
Like, he scores really well on the test, but in practical application, it's a
totally
no.
Smart. Just don't let him work with humans. So, it is. I mean, sometimes, I've really encouraged this with my daughter when she was kind of getting into university. I said, look, go take a class and if you may be surprised that you like it and are better at it than you thought, it may open your eyes to something you didn't even know about. Or you may be like, this totally sucks. I took accounting. I come from a family of CFOs and CPAs. I remember calling my parents and being like, I couldn't get through accounting. Like 3 weeks in, I was like completely lost. And like I'm talking, and they're like, what do you not get? And I'm like, everything.
Literally, I didn't understand accounting until my MBA, and I took intro to financial accounting in college because my mom was like, this is the most important thing you have to learn. And I distinctly recall being in that classroom and like looking at the girl next to me, and I was like, do you understand any of this?
Yeah.
Like, I was like, I asked her, I was like, did I miss a class? Like, I'm literally so confused right now.
Yeah. And I could understand some, and then I get home and like do everything I could to confuse it. But then when I got out in the real world, and this is like, 15 years later, where suddenly like I was at the company and I kind of volunteered myself. Again, a lot of these decisions are volunteering for things you're not qualified for, which be careful, like don't volunteer yourself for surgery or something like that. Like I'd be like, yeah, I can figure that out. And once it was like, okay, the company is spending this much. I need to figure out how much our operating costs are. Operating costs. Got it. And then how much revenue is coming in. I'm like, all right, that kind of makes sense. But then I had all this practical information, which is like server costs and these other things. And then other things started mixing. I'm like, well, how many users do we have? And what's that? And I'm like, okay, that's pretty damn close to our cost per user per month. And if we're generating this much per user, okay. So like if we could put these two people to reduce the cost per user per month by 30%, but the VP of product wants to add 3 new features, which would take 3 people. Okay. Now we need to get everybody together and be like, well, which do we want to do? And do we want to do one versus the other? Do we want to do one first and do the other one later? Let's have a conversation around this. And like, it all made sense. And people were like, this is finance. I was like, look at me. Didn't know, right?
Doing finance.
Yeah, it's right. So, rent a CFO, right? I actually had somebody later and they're like, so you're like the CFO of the company. I was like, no. They're like, why are you so against it? I'm like, because that implies certain things that I know definitively I don't know. And I don't know how to go do. So, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a CFO, but I am curious. I did figure it out.
And somebody said something once, or like actually the accounting professor I had in my MBA said, he was like, if you can do your personal finance, you can do business finance. He's like, it's really just the same thing, but at a crazier scale. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, okay. Cause like when you were just talking about it, I could relate it and be like, okay, well, this is my salary every month. And like, this is any extra income I have coming in. And I'm like, I really want to buy a new TV console for my apartment. But I also have, these expenses every month. And it's like, okay, do I want to put savings away, or do I really want like a new entertainment console? And you're really just about like making choices. But at the end of the day, it's sort of, if you can figure it out logically.
I dispense this advice. I'm going to sound, like I said, I've said this to my kids 100 times. They're 23 and 25. But I've said this to a number of people. I said, there's 3 things that I will tell you that I think will be a huge leg up in your career. 1, get a basic, don't worry about finance or accounting. Just get a basic working knowledge of Excel. Just go online, watch a bunch of YouTube videos and do your personal finances on it and learn how to create a budget. Because when you come into the workforce, someone may say, like, you're the office manager. Well, what should be the budget for G&A? Yeah. And you could be like, well, I don't know. Like, but if you're like, I can bang it out and you can send someone access to a Google sheet or an Excel file. And it's like, she dropped everything in there, and the CFO like came over and was like, rock on, high five, sister. Like, I was able just to plug this in. It's a huge Lego. So that's one, just learn Excel. 2, try Toastmasters or some other type of public speaking program. I've had people come back literally like 5-10 years later, like out of the woodwork, and be like, you told me that when I was director of engineering at such and such company. I'm like, God, I don't remember saying that. They're like, I went and I did it. And the reason I tell people is your ability to communicate ideas, whether it's in front of a group of 500 people or in a meeting or in an email or in a one-on-one conversations, is a huge driver in your ability to take on more responsibility. And then third is, I think just comes from a level of curiosity, which is learn how to work with people cross-functionally and cross-generationally and cross-culturally or whatever it may be. But if you're in a big company, you are missing out if you're not, back to what I said at the top of this, you're missing out by not inviting people who are outside of your department, your job function, and learning about what they do. Because if you can do those 3, you can run a budget, which means you can manage a team and work with an executive team to kind of forecast revenue, operating expense, or whatever it may be. 2, you will have cogent, clear ideas when you present them and become respected because you have learned how to kind of communicate in a way that builds confidence and it's time-tested ways. You're not just babbling on in a meeting where it's like, oh God, here comes Tony again. And then the third is, making yourself more rounded. Become a domain expert, learn that craft. But if you can have a level of expertise as to, one of the phrases I learned back at Yahoo from, shout out to Sue So, who's still my friend and has been general counsel, but we were young. She was an attorney back then. We were young, up and coming. Sue, if you're listening to this, thanks again. There are no legal issues. They're business issues. And, what it taught me was I was learning a lot from a lawyer about kind of quasi-legal stuff, but I was able to translate it when I was negotiating contracts is, why does indemnification matter from a business perspective? Well, Let me tell you why. And I learned it from her. And it was just, kind of spending time with her, somewhat working, but also outside of it, be like, why did this and like that? And be like, explain, like, oh, now I get it. So learn Excel, take a public speaking course, and network outside of your department or domain expertise.
Yeah,
that's all I got. I don't have any more knowledge or insights. I kind of
mic drop.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Excel class mic drop. That's what I'm known for.
I think that's perfect, and I think that's going to be a great place to close. I wanted to add one thing, because if I can add to your list, I think the best part about number 3, networking, is like not only are you learning from them, but you're also connecting with them. And I think like making friends is super important because A, you never know what you're going to learn. And obviously you just explained why you need to learn from other people. And also B, it's so amazing to have like this great network of people that you can reach out to be like, hey, I'm, maybe going in a completely different career direction, and you work in this industry and I would love to pick your brain. Or like, hey, my new company that I'm starting needs a lawyer, and like, you're the best person for the job, and maybe they were 100%. Like, oh, great timing,
100%. As you advance in your career and in life, you get hired less of what you can do, but it's more the people you can bring in. It really is. I'm going to tell you this. And like, people just like, well, don't have to be the expert. Like, no, because like, if somebody's like, I'm going to give you this huge amount of responsibility, logically, no, it's like, well, you can't be all things. They want to know, can you bring wildly smart people around you? And if you're like, well, I'd have to go on Indeed and hire a bunch of people, like, well, what the hell have you been doing for the past 15 or 20 years? Like, if you don't like have people that
like, are just all your friends idiots or what?
Yeah, right. Like, and there's some people, and you're like, I mean, look, I'll take, and I'm not a huge admirer of his on a personal level, but Larry Ellison is a classic example of, there are tons of I mean, Mark Benioff started Salesforce, Bill Siebel started Siebel Systems, and on and on and on, of people who came out of that organization that went on to do great things. It's a pretty impressive thing. I mean, Oracle in itself is a pretty darn impressive thing, of course, but like, So it's that ability to bring people who are that high caliber, into your sphere where maybe you just need a one-off, solution or advice. But you also want to be that person who other people call. Like you want to be the person that sometimes, I talked to a guy today and I got an email from somebody I hadn't talked to literally in probably 15 years. Guy I worked with at a startup, long time ago. And he said, hey, this guy's facing this certain thing. He's a founder of a startup. Could you spare 30 minutes for him? And I was like, of course, right? So many people did this for me. I don't know that I gave him any type of insight. I think a lot of it was, what he said was something to the effect of, I'm not crazy. Like you at least validated that I'm not crazy. And I'm like, no, you're not crazy. Like this is all rational. So anyway, I'll close with that. We've probably gone way past like church. Church less an hour. Like I hope we haven't gone that long. Have we?
Yeah, but like it doesn't matter. It's my podcast. We can go as long as we want.
It all gets edited down to 3 minutes anyways. It's okay.
On social media, it absolutely does.
Yeah. Cool.
Eric, this has been so much fun. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Maddie, my pleasure.
Really valuable.
Yes. No, you're smart. You're a spark of energy and good positivity. I enjoyed it and really appreciate it.